I'm Michelle Cott, and this is my 10-minute presentation on immigration law. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over the scope and the purpose of immigration law here in the United States. Show of hands, who here is a descendant of an immigrant? That being said, immigration law, the subject matter can be very polarizing, and it can invoke strong emotions in people. So that being said, I implore the audience to speak respectfully to each other, to try to understand other people's viewpoints. Imposing one's will, bullying your beliefs on other people will not be tolerated during this presentation, but audience participation is encouraged. Without further ado, we're going to watch a short video on immigration and why coming to America is so important to people. Can you back up a little bit, just so everybody else can see the video?
Can I go right here? Mama, can I be right
Not
here?
like the brazen giant of great fame with conquering limbs.
Strike from land to land.
Here at our sea-washed
Sunset Gate shall
Oh,
stand,
let me get my toy.
a mighty
Get
woman
my toy.
with a church.
Whose
Hold
land
on, I'll be right
is
back.
the imprisoned.
and her name,
Mother of exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide love. Valentine's land, the air bridge harbor,
that Twin Cities friend.
Ancient lands where story pop, cries,
She with silent lips.
Give me your
Tired.
you're poor.
In your humble masses.
yearning to breath free.
Directed refuse of your teeming shore.
And these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me. I live
my land.
beside the golden door.
Okay, so that was the poem The New Colossus, and it perfectly captures why people are so passionate about coming to this country. So the purpose of this 10-minute presentation is to talk about the scope and the purpose of immigration law here in the United States of America. And we're going to accomplish that through briefly examining what exactly immigration law is, the history of immigration law, and current immigration policies here in our country. Can anybody give me, in their own words, what they think the purpose of immigration law is here in the United States? You there. Ma'am.
Me?
Yes.
Control the population?
Excellent. Excellent. Anyone else?
Harry, do you know what the reason is? What was the question again? Can you repeat it again?
No questions? And that's okay. We will get to that as we go through the presentation. So what exactly is immigration law? Immigration law rules, or it's rules established by the federal government to determine who can come here and how long they can stay. Immigration law also governs the nationalization process. So it establishes a pathway to citizenship for immigrants that want to come to the United States and become permanent citizens. And last, it controls the detention and removal of foreign nationals that are here illegally or who originally come here legally but stay past their visa, past their allotted time. Next, we're going to talk about the history of immigration laws here in the United States. Again, disclaimer, there is a lengthy history of immigration law here in the country. Because we only have 10 minutes, I'm going to briefly cover important periods within the time frame. So, little to no regulation during the 18th and early 19th centuries. Immigration was actually encouraged. America wanted to grow, they wanted to diversify, they wanted to bring the best, the brightest, the smartest, the most athletic here to build our country. So immigration was encouraged. Individual states began passing immigration laws, however, after the Civil War. In 1875 was the first U.S. Supreme Court decision that basically gave federal jurisdiction to immigration law. So even though the states had their own individual laws, the federal system was the ultimate end-sayer when it came to immigration law and regulation. In 1892, the immigration station on Ellis Island opened. At Ellis Island, that immigration station had different courthouses, showers, a cafeteria, places for people to stay when they came over and attempted to become citizens of this country. And then between 1900 and 1920, 14.5 million immigrants immigrated to the United States. That was one of the first big booms in immigration our country experienced. Now, with that boom came apprehension. Is there going to be enough jobs for Americans? Is there going to be enough housing for Americans? Who exactly are these people coming to our country? So our government began passing laws to restrict immigration and try to get a better handle on it. So you have the Immigration Acts of 1921 and 1924. And then major restrictions came during World War II when our country became engaged with Germany, Japan, Italy. We began to vet people coming into this country, especially the Japanese. After World War II, our country lightened a lot of the regulation due to the war-ravaged countries over in Europe. So you had the Displaced Persons Act of 1948 and the Refugee Act of 1953. Following that, you have the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, again, which enabled more people from Europe to come over into this country to escape political oppression and poor economic development in their own country due to the war. The Cold War refugee era, our country again opened its borders to people that were trying to flee communist countries and take political asylum here. So again, we were very welcoming with our immigration stance. And the 1980s and 1990s, we started to tighten up the belt per se with immigration. And we started to tighten our laws and make it more restrictive on who could come here, how many visas were available to people from different countries. Especially, it's worth noting the 1980s and 1990s, again, Americans became nervous that there was going to be no jobs available. So a lot of the immigration reform that occurred in the 80s and 90s specifically targeted immigrants that were working, whether it be in industry or agriculture. Post 9/11, we saw extreme vetting of individuals from certain countries. National security took the forefront of exactly what we're trying to do with immigration. So from what I saw from looking into immigration, it's very cyclical. Depending on world events, not only what's going on in our country, but depending on what's going on in the world, we're either very, very welcoming with open borders and trying to help refugees, or in times of economic turmoil or war, we get very, very restrictive, and we seem to vet a lot more and cut back on the visas and the people that we admit into this country. So this is a chart showing immigrants by region during a 50-year period. And it shows that in the beginning of our country's history, Europe, primarily all our immigrants were coming from Europe. And then, as you can see throughout the years, a majority of our immigrants now in 2018 are coming from North and South America. Okay, next we're going to get into U.S. immigration law and where it gets its source of legal authority from. So there are 3 areas that it gets its source of legal authority. The first is going to be the Immigration and Nationality Act. The second is federal case law. And the third is administrative policy through Congress and through executive action by the President of the United States. The Immigration and Nationality Act is the main source of immigration law here in the United States. It was created in 1952. It's very comprehensive. So prior to 1952, there were many, many different acts, unified, U.S. code. This kind of brought everything under one house and made it much easier to enforce and to regulate. It's also very dynamic. The act is constantly changing and evolving and being amended. Federal case law. So when the Supreme Court rules on different cases, that directly affects immigration. For example, the first case I have here, Wing versus United States, it deals with extending 5th and 6th Amendment rights to immigrants. Specifically, every alien shall not be held to answer for a capital or other infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. The second case, again, brings up due process concerns and does not allow the government to take an immigrant and lock them up in detention for an undetermined amount of time. They are afforded due process rights that all Americans are afforded. Administrative policy deals with, again, actions of the president, actions of Congress. So an example of an executive order that recently happened was President Trump's travel ban. And legislation from Congress, examples would be the DREAM Act, which is the Dreamers, and then we have Katie's Law. And a little bit more information about the DREAMer Act. It's the Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act. Basically, if a person came here illegally and had a child, the legislation would enable that child, who's technically not an American citizen, to gain citizenship. The Katie's Law was named after Katie Stein, who was killed in San Francisco by an illegal immigrant who had been deported 5 times prior for felonious offenses. So that act is going to enable judges to give out harsher penalties to illegal immigrants with pre-existing criminal histories. Next, I'd briefly like to cover some federal immigration agencies that are often connected with immigration policy here in the United States. We have the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Department. They handle citizenship applications, green cards, visas, and work permits. Next, we have Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. They are the enforcement hand of these agencies. They handle all type of immigration enforcement. They actively look for individuals violating immigration law. They're also in charge of prosecution of immigration law violators. Customs and Border Patrol patrols the ports of entry into the United States, so your land, your sea, your airport. The Department of Justice are involved in the immigration court system and removal proceedings. The Department of State runs the National Visa Center. And the Department of Health and Human Services is handles the Office of Refugee Resettlement and deals with unaccompanied minors that come to our country. So what's the purpose of immigration law and why is it so important? Anyone? Anyone at all? Okay. Well, that's
it's so that there just isn't an unrestricted flood of immigrants to this country.
exactly. There has to be some type of rules in place, and I think our immigration law, though not perfect, does a great job of trying to balance not only the needs of people that want to come here, but also the needs of U.S. citizens. So, immigration law, the purpose is going to be, citizenship for people that have a desire to come to our country and become U.S. citizens that are looking to create a better life for themselves and for their family. We're talking about refugees, as well as reunifying families where a family member may be a U.S. citizen, but his wife or her husband, their kids, their grandparents may not be U.S. citizens. There's procedures to enable them to come here and become citizens, to reunify that family. Employment. Immigration was built on trying to improve America, to take the best and brightest from countries all over the world. So we want to admit immigrants with skills that are going to bolster the U.S. economy and make us better. Diversification and humanitarian efforts. You want to diversify America by accepting immigrants from countries that really aren't represented here in the United States, which is considered the melting pot of the world. You also want to protect humanitarian needs. You want to protect people that are in countries that may target them because they're a woman, or they're gay or lesbian, or they're Christian. So that's why it's important to have the humanitarian efforts. And last, national security. We can never forget that. It's extremely important. We need to ensure that Americans are safe within our borders. So we have to be cognizant of who's entering our country and who's leaving our country. Any questions?
No, you covered it pretty good.
Thank you, Papa. Alright, here's some sources that I used to help with my presentation, as well as if you're interested in learning more about U.S. immigration law. So just to recap, in summary, U.S. immigration law is extremely, extremely dynamic. It's constantly changing, evolving. It can be a very polarizing subject, but it's a conversation worth having to take care of people as well as take care of the citizens of the United States. I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you.
Take care and have a wonderful night.